Welcome to the Equine Vet Connect podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. I'm a veterinarian and a farrier. The goal of this podcast is to educate horse people, break things down, bust myths, and keep it real. Speaking of breaking things down, here's my legal disclaimer to keep my attorney and insurance company happy. While I am a vet, I may not be your vet. Contact them before trying anything you hear on this podcast. Remember, just because you watched it on YouTube or heard it on a podcast does not mean you can do it. Please use common sense. Welcome back to the Equine Vet Connect podcast. I'm Dan Carter here at Countryside Equine Hospital. Kind of a cool podcast. I'm in the studio today, which is also our treatment room one. And I've got Sarah Donahue with me, and you're in Oklahoma, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So this is our first high-tech podcast over the interweb. We got a guest from, another time zone, another state, and so to all the listeners out there, bear with us. This is our first one, and we'll dive in today. So Sarah, you work with Standlee Forages out of Kimberly, Idaho, correct?
Yes. So I've been with the company for about 5 years now. And my history with Standlee goes back even further than that because I fed the product for probably 5-6 years before I even went to work for the company. And because that really stemmed from, I grew up down in Texas and I live in Oklahoma. So blister beetles for me are a huge concern. I don't touch any local alfalfa with a 10-foot pole if it's going for my horses. And so it kind of comes back to that, where can I find a consistent supply of quality product that I can be worry-free when I'm feeding my horses? And that's how I got introduced to the brand. But I've been a lifelong horse person, so it makes going to work every day really fun for me.
Well, I'll tell you, Standlee is, I think y'all have to be the biggest name in forage production and in hay. I mean, y'all have literally taken hay and gone, I know nationally. Are y'all international now, or?
We do a little bit of exports. It just kind of ebbs and flows with the hay market and what we've got going on domestically. So we run a lot of hay, and it's kind of funny that you said like it's just a hay company, and that's how it started out was Mike Standlee, looking for different avenues and markets for these hay bales that he's got, which, they're like a dime a dozen. And, but then when you dive into it, you find out that region plays a big factor into the quality of hay, because when you're looking at Idaho, you've got the volcanic soil. You're able to easily sun cure those products so that you're able to retain the leaves, like which alfalfa, that's where the nutrition is. So here we are on the northwestern region, and here you are over here in Florida and the southeast in Georgia, for example, and you don't have the capability to produce quite the same kind of hay. And so that's really how the gap that Mike saw. And so it started out with shipping bales to the East Coast to the racetracks, and then it's just really stemmed from there to where it's a company that has over 5,000 distribution points. So coast to coast, Alaska, Hawaii, and then as you mentioned, like a little bit of international. And so it's really kind of exploded, but at the same time been able to stay. Standlee is Standlee. It's still owned and operated by the Standlee family since 1981. That's when we went formal. But history goes back even further than that. If you wanted to kind of look at what led to the creation of the company, and it's evolved over the years. We started as Standlee Hay Company, and then we went to Standlee Premium Western Forage, and that's what people most notably know us as. Because I'd say that's the brand that really started launching in Tractor Supply and a lot of different independent retailers. And then in 2023 is when we dropped back to just Standlee to allow us to continue to expand and grow so that we can better serve consumers.
Well, I can tell you, your product has reached. I knew it was international because I've seen both the hay and the hay cubes down in the Cayman Islands. I I take care of all the horses on the island down there, and I have seen your bags. So y'all have made, at least in the Caribbean, y'all are definitely international. But no, it's a really cool story. I was reading it, and I think a lot of people don't realize when you're talking alfalfa hay. Growing up in the southeast, we don't see alfalfa here. Our soil just doesn't grow it well. We've tried to develop some different cereals that allow us to grow it here. But when you go to Idaho, and I love Idaho. I fly fish, so that's like mecca for fly fishing, right? And when you get out there, and especially during hay season, like the whole state just smells of alfalfa. I mean, it is like I try to explain to people, they're bales of hay as big as buildings out, or not bales, but stacks of hay as big as buildings. I mean, it's massive, and it's this beautiful green, just everything you want in the hay, and you get jealous because it's like, well, why can't we get that here? Well, Standlee figured that out. Y'all figured out how to get it here and get it all over the world. So it's a really cool story how y'all are able to do that. Um, and one of the things that I think is really kind of cool is your consistency and your quality, because y'all are pretty much a vertically integrated company where y'all are growing it, packaging it, shipping it. I mean, I was reading about how many rail cars y'all have, like the logistics behind moving this product, and y'all are involved from the time that hay is basically from the time the first swather hits the field until a horse consumes it. It's Standlee.
We're actually involved even further back than that. We call it truly seed to feed. I love
Hmm.
that you brought up the vertical integration, because that's one of the things that I feel like when it comes to all of the different hay companies that are out there that are providing products in stores outside of just your local hay producer. That's one of the things that really makes us unique, because we call it seed to feed, because we work with managing that raw product from the time that it's going in the ground all the way until the time that it's in the feeder. There's variables that are in there that you can't always control, and that you just you got to roll with and figure out how to adapt around them when you're looking at water or weather. But that's anywhere that you're at in the country, and that's any producer that you're looking at. So looking at kind of the system that we've developed and how do we mitigate risk where we can to ensure that consistency, that year-round supply, and that quality. We know that horses thrive on a consistent diet. We know that horses are really kind of, their diet should be based in fiber, and that making sure that you're providing a high quality fiber is going to ensure that you have a healthy horse. And so that's really a lot of the basis behind why we do what we do. And so being able to control the quality of the raw forage that we are taking into our manufacturing plant, and not only taking it into the plant, it's our swathers in the field that are going through there working with growers. So we have a whole ag resources division of Standlee outside of
Hmm.
what people know as Standlee on the packaged goods and traditional bale side. We also have Standlee hay trucking. So it's our trucks that are hauling those bales over to the stacking yard that is going to be the place where they get either put into a shed, or they're going to be stacked and tarped to where they're completely closed off from the elements. And those two items are really I'm going to say one of the key pieces for keeping that product that you get when you open a bag of pellets or cubes and it being filled fresh, is being able to retain as much of that quality out of the field as you can as you go through all of these different pieces, and you store the hay, and then we pull it from the stacks and we run it in, and whether it's going to be ground or it's going to be chopped, depending on what product that it's going to be used outside of just the compressed bales. So a lot of different factors in there, and a, not necessarily just a handful of people that are trained on what that quality and consistency should look like. For as big of a company, as far as reach as we have across all of the different aspects, we have approximately 300 employees. That's your sales, your marketing, your administrative, your people in the plant, your people out in the field that are on the road in the summers with the swather. So when you look at the scope of it, it's actually really small. And so every person that steps foot on the yard at the plant, we all go through a little bit of a training, and then we all just take so much pride in the company and our job and the product that we're delivering, that's what we're all watching out for. And we have enabled our employees to not be afraid to step up and say, hey, we've got an issue here, because we want to catch those issues. We don't want somebody to be afraid of stepping outside of their position. We want them to feel like they're contributing, and because that's what, ultimately at the end of the day, we're also feeding these products to our animals, because a lot of us have horses and livestock, and we purchase Standlee too, and so that's the big thing that kind of drives the culture.
Well, and it's pretty impressive when you can maintain a company of your scale, but maintain quality across the board like you have. I mean, that's a true testament to leadership, true testament to the people on the team, and maintaining that quality as you've grown to the size you have. And one of the cool things that I really want to talk about today, I have a limited nutrition background, but one of the things that I'm constantly talking with horse owners about, and I always joke, there's few hills I'll die on, but this is one of them. The good Lord made horses to eat forage. Forage is where the diet starts. When you look at it from a math perspective, a horse is going to eat 2.5% of body weight a day. We know we want a minimum 1.5% of body weight as forage. That's the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said if I can make that percentage higher, that's even better. That's going to reduce risk of stomach ulcers. That's going to reduce risk of colic. Their GI tract is built to digest high quality forages. And so I tell people, like, when you're looking at, when they ask about how to feed a horse, one of my first statements is, we're going to either buy or have if we can't graze it on the ground, we're going to purchase the best quality forage money can buy. That's where it starts. And if we can do that, we're going to reduce grain costs. We're going to reduce the amount of grain that goes into horses. And I know now there's this big forage first movement, but really it shouldn't be a movement. It should have always been forage first. Like that's where we start. Like the forage is the basis of everything. And so I guess that's the place I'd like to start today is let's talk about what goes into forage. How do we identify great forages? And let's talk about what makes for a great diet.
Right now the industry calls it forage first. At Standlee, we call it forage foundation, or forage foundation nutrition, because that's always been the foundation of the diet or the way that we've approached the diet, is that you start with high quality forage, and then you build from there to meet that horse's needs, and looking at, is it a performance horse? And if it's a performance horse, is it just on the mild side where, maybe they're getting rode 3 times a week, or is it a heavy performance horse? Like you've got a race horse that is an athlete. And we've got to treat these horses like athletes and be able to identify and fine tune and tweak, not just the forage. And like you said, there's a lot of different types of forage. So are we feeding one that meets their needs? Because at the end of the day, that's what the diet should be doing. It should be meeting their needs and being able to customize it to fit that unique animal. We can't just blanket feed every animal.
No, and that plays a big role, because when you talk about forage, you've got to start with, what is this horse doing? How many calories is it expending? I always talk about buckets, right? When I'm talking nutrition, buckets. The first buckets we got to fill is we got to live. We call that maintenance. So we got to feed enough that we can just live. If a horse is growing, well, that's another bucket we got to fill. We got to feed that growth. If they're actively working and performing, well, now we've got another bucket we've got to fill. If we're trying to gain weight, well, there's another bucket. And so when you're looking at forages, you're right. It's not a one-step fits all. And I think that's where a diet needs to start is, let's look at the forage we're feeding. There's a lot of debate. Does it need alfalfa, Timothy, orchard, teff, whatever. And I always say we shouldn't just look at, when we buy hay, it shouldn't be like, well, what's down at the feed store or what's locally produced. Let's go look at what the horse needs. Not every horse needs alfalfa. A lot of horses that they need it. I love alfalfa hay personally. If you were going to, in my opinion, if you were going to go design a hay to feed the horses, it's alfalfa. And
Yeah.
so I'd love to hear kind of y'all's take as far as, what y'all see from a forage perspective and where we need to be basing some of this.
And we talk about not just like taking a blanket approach to every horse. Every horse is unique. And then it's kind of the same with feeding like hay itself too. It's like, okay, well, I went and got high quality alfalfa. But a lot of horses, and as owners, you can sit there and you can feed different types of hay together, because ultimately we're not feeding the horse, we're feeding the bugs in the gut microbiome. And so we talk consistency. And sometimes if you have to make rapid changes and you're feeding one source of forage or type of forage, then you're gonna, let's say it's March and you've ran out of hay that you've stacked in the barn for the winter, and then you've got a lag until whether you're feeding local or you're going out and you're buying it at a store. And that's part of the reason that incorporating like a package restore source forage product is good. But feeding a variety is that if you want to feed alfalfa, you don't have to just feed alfalfa. Or if you want to feed grass, you don't have to just feed grass. It's ultimately the fiber sources. And I wonder if one thing that, you and I probably know, because we study nutrition a little bit more than the average Joe, is that alfalfa isn't a grass, it's a legume. So it actually fits more in like the family of soybeans. So that's what really makes it unique. And that it's a high calorie, high protein. So that's where, like, when you look at the athlete focus, it's super beneficial there. But on the flip side, it's low sugar, low starch. So it's for a lot of your metabolic horses, unless you have ones that are triggered by alfalfa, and there are horses that are susceptible to that. But that's where it fits right in there as a great universal fiber source.
I think that's one of the myths that if I could get and I talk about this all the time. Everyone always says, "Well, I don't want to feed alfalfa; it's so high in sugar." And I was like, "Well, actually, it's not. So we're actually lower in sugar, but what we are high in are these easily digestible forms of fiber. We talk fibers divided up in different fractions, A's, B's, and C's, and that's the beautiful thing about alfalfa. It's high in that A fraction fiber, and it's high in that B1 fraction fiber, and it's going to allow for fantastic digestibility without these huge sugar spikes that you see with other hays. Because I'll talk to people. We grow a lot of ryegrass hay around in Georgia. It's actually one of our better ones produced. But I was like, if you run a test, it's going to be way higher than alfalfa. Even some of the coastal Bermudas we grow, the actual NSC content is way higher than that's in alfalfa. And I think if I could get rid of one myth, that would be it. Like it's low in those NSCs, but the type of fiber that is in alfalfa is incredibly digestible. You're not getting the big spikes in glucose and insulin that you see with some of these more sugary hays. I guess that's why I always say if I had to go pick one thing, that's it. It's like alfalfa was grown to go feed a horse, and the way I see it.
You talked on myths, and like if that's the one that you would bust, mine would be that alfalfa makes horses hot. It's not the alfalfa. And it's like it kind of stems back, like circle back to the conversation we just had a minute ago of feeding a horse to meet its needs. It's high energy, which is fantastic. So if you think about it, like, and making sure that you're feeding the right amount for that horse's needs, because my favorite analogy with it is like, if I'm sitting here at my desk and I drink an energy drink, but then I don't go move or like go for a walk, run, be physical, I'm just sitting here, I'm going to be jittery, and I'm going to start sweating a little bit. It's the same with the horses. If you've got a horse that is in is sitting in a stall and it's not doing anything, and that's what it does 90% of the time, it's going to seem like it's hot because that horse has energy and it needs to be expelled. So it's really not the alfalfa. It's making sure that you're feeding the right amount of alfalfa for that horse.
Well, and that's something too that I think is really important when we talk about feeding forages, and this really changed with the compressed bales. I was down at one of my farms, and it's the first place I've ever seen this. He actually, I just thought of this. He actually feeds y'all's product on the compressed side, but he has a scale on his hay wagon. So when this wagon's coming through the barn, because he buys the really big bales, and he has a scale. And I think what blew my mind is when I looked at what 6 pounds of alfalfa in a compressed bale, like when you look at the amount that's in like 6 pounds on a compressed bale, it doesn't look like very much.
No,
and I've
it
always,
does not.
and in the horse world, we're programmed, we're going to go feed a flake. We're going to feed 1 flake, 2 flake, 3 flake. Well, I can tell you, somebody's baled a little bit of hay. Those tensioner springs on the baler determine what's in that flake. And it was interesting because he actually fed hay based on weight, because he's like, I keep hay in their stall that they're going to eat, so they have something all the time. And he was really feeding alfalfa to meet the need of the horse. So they're constantly eating their local grass. But when he fed on weight. And like literally his guys, he had a grocery store scale in there, and every horse was weighed out how much alfalfa they got to maintain that horse where it needed to be.
That's one thing
And
that we always say, feed by weight, not volume, because even on your locally sourced hay, your flakes size, and it's like you said, it's that tensioner on the baler. Like, how tight is it packing that bale? Is it loose? And so a flake is going to vary, and we don't, anywhere that you look on the internet or when you're talking to people, you're talking to a nutritionist, no one's recommending, hey, go feed 2 flakes of this. Because ultimately, like you said, what does that flake weigh? And we know that we have to feed horses 1.5 to 2.5% of their body weight on average. And so a lot of people that I've seen, you said you're a fishing guy, the fishing scales sit there and, like, especially if they're feeding in nets, be able to hang it and check that weight and know exactly what they're feeding. And, not just with the bale hay, it's the cubes, the pellets. And here's the trick, is that it doesn't matter what format hay is processed into, it all weighs the same. A pound is a pound the world around.
No, and that's so important. I love the fishing scale idea, because I've got a cooking scale that's in my truck. I've got, like, when I'm driving around and I'll start talking about nutrition, I'm like pulling out my little kitchen scale, and it's like, no, we're not cupping this, we're not scooping this, we're weighing this. And then the hardest thing in the world, though, is to try to weigh forage on a kitchen scale. So now I'm going to go get a fishing scale, because I love that idea, because, it's important, because those tensioner springs on the baler, it's setting the weight on it. It's easy to overfeed, or one of the big things I see is underfeeding, because you've been feeding 2 flakes, you've been feeding 3 flakes. Well, 3 flakes may be, that may be 15 pounds one on one load. It may only be 8 pounds on another. Well, we've cut the amount we're feeding in half. And so I think getting those scales and know what you're feeding on a weight basis. No, don't guess your way through this. Know what you're doing.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people, especially when they're saying, hey, I need to put weight on my horse. And first question I ask is, what are you feeding and how much? And they say, well, I'm doing a scoop of pellets. Okay, how much does your scoop weigh? And, when you're looking at things like that, you don't necessarily have to weigh it every feeding. You take that scoop and you weigh it one time when it's full. And as long as you're feeding the same like it's the same, let's say alfalfa pellets, for example, that's what I feed. So I'll revert back to that one for examples. And as long as it's the same diameter, same product, then you're good. Once you know that this is how many pounds fits into this cup here, or this is how many pounds goes into this 3-quart scoop, then you're able to kind of adapt from there. So then it makes feeding a little bit more simple to where you're still meeting the weight needs, but then on the backside, like you're giving yourself a little cheat there of, okay, I did this the other day. I know this is 5 pounds, so here we go. I get 1 scoop here and I get 2 scoops there, so that you are making sure you're meeting the needs for that animal.
That's one of the things that we'll do is when people say the scoop, it's like I grab my scale, we go in, we'll scoop up those pellets, and we weigh it. Say, okay, this is a 3-pound scoop, and then we get a Sharpie and we write on this is a 3-pound scoop for this. This is the alfalfa pellet scoop. This is 3 pounds of alfalfa that fits in the scoop, and it's like so if you do half, we're at 1.5. It's a one-time deal,
Yeah,
but it's a big difference. And the great thing about feeds is most of those kind of weigh the same. Once you weighed them once, they're going to continue to weigh the same. But when you start talking about forages, like you said, it's all about baler tension. How tight's that baler set when you bale it. So when you get that new load in, to understand, like, okay, this is what a flake weighs. So in a hay net,
Yep.
use a fishing scale. We know out of this load of hay, a flake weighs X amount. Well, then our diet can stay real consistent. So if we know they need, 6 pounds of alfalfa a day, or whatever that magic number is, when that new load comes in, grab your fishing scale. I'm going to give these out for Christmas this year. Grab your fishing scale, weigh a flake, and then you can transfer that over. Like, okay, we know out of this load, a flake weighs X many pounds. So this is what we need to adjust. That's a great idea. Like I said, we may be giving out fishing scales this year for Christmas to everybody. So
spoiler alert, you know what you're getting under the tree.
So
No, and I'm right there with you. I agree. Probably the bales is where you're going to see the most variability. And we've kind of hit on a lot of different hay products. We've talked bales, we talked a little bit on pellets, and each of them has their own fit, and it really just kind of depends on the animal. Obviously, like that long stem is going to be the closest to mimicking grazing and stimulating chewing. And I'm kind of wondering, like, how many people actually know that a horse only produces saliva while it's chewing. So that's why it's really important to stimulate it and then be able to prevent choke and continue to lubricate the digestive system for maximum efficiency.
No, and the other part about that is when they're chewing, there's actually bicarbonate buffers in that saliva, and people don't think, because ulcers is all the rage right now. And if they're actively chewing and actively eating, every time they swallow, we're adding a buffer to that system. Because when you think about it, horses were built to eat, 18 to 20 hours a day. I mean, they're continuously grazing. And so they need to continuously have that chewing action because, like I said, every time they swallow, they're adding a buffer. And not to keep talking about how great alfalfa hay is, but I'm kind of a fan. The other part about alfalfa, we call it tums, like horsey tums. We're talking to people about ulcers because it has a form of calcium that's in it, and alfalfa is a great source of calcium. But that calcium comes in the form of calcium carbonate.
Yep.
Which is the same thing that, like, if you purify calcium carbonate, squeeze it down into a tablet, you have tums. So by adding that, by feeding alfalfa, we said we're getting a slow release of that calcium carbonate. So we've got a buffer from saliva, and we've got a buffer that's coming from the hay itself. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of it.
Well, and we're a big proponent of saying, like, if you're getting ready to go ride, go take a handful of alfalfa pellets or give your horse a little bit of part of a flake, and let's say maybe like 30 minutes, an hour before you go ride, get that sodium bicarbonate in there or calcium. Sorry, I'm obviously going back to NA. Because I was right, like that's exactly where I wanted to go as soon as we started talking on ulcers, was that alfalfa is naturally higher in calcium, so it's a perfect buffer. So you feed a little bit before you go ride, because if we look at the way that the horse's stomach is designed, it's not designed in the digestive system to actually like fill at full capacity it's designed to kind of have that little bit of continuous flow. So there's a portion of, I think it's the squamous tissue that's on the upper part that is always going to be susceptible to that splash factor. And that's what you're using those buffers to protect against, is as that horse is riding and moving, and that acid is splashing around in the stomach, are you protecting that tissue that's more susceptible to ulcers? I've got a little cow horse filly that I show that she runs a little bit hotter anyways, and then being on the road traveling, and there's a lot of stress factors outside of just traveling. I think that's the one that people look at, or that comes to the front of their brain when they're thinking of stress, is like, all right, I'm taking my horse to a horse show, or I'm trailering them. But it's things like, I mean, especially in your case, you've got a horse that comes in that has to go into let's say they've got to have surgery, and then they've got to go into a recovery stall, and they're used to being turned out on a 10-acre trap. So that's stress right there, is being in a new environment and being cooped up. And so how else can you help protect them and help them recover? And it's like you said, it's feeding alfalfa right there. You're meeting the horse's need, and you're naturally giving them that antacid.
Well, we talk about that a lot, is, there's some factors we can't control. If they're going to be a show horse, they've got to go on the road, and we may not can control the stress they feel, but what we can control? We can control diet. We can talk about that splash factor, which is a huge shift. I think back, 20, 30 years ago, when I was first in horses, it's almost like, no, if you're going to ride them, you don't want them to have a full stomach. You want that stomach empty. Like that was the dogma across everywhere. And now we've learned that's a bad idea. And
Yes.
having that upper mat to protect that squamous epithelium. And then, like I said, when you throw in, I look at the calcium from two perspectives. One, that calcium carbonate. The carbonate's a great buffer for stomach acid. But also, if these horses are exercising, that requires muscle. Muscle contraction functions off of calcium. If you run low on calcium, your muscles cease to contract, or actually they cease to relax. But let's just go with they don't work. I'm about to over nerd this.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the things I was thinking too when you were talking about blister beetles. I remember the first time I saw that. One of the hallmark signs of it is actually low calcium, and these horses are very tense, very stiff, very tight. We dealt with a barn of 30 horses that had blister beetles, and I pray to God every day I never see another one of those. It was a horrible situation, which is why I'm a big proponent. Alfalfa needs to come from up north. But that was kind of one of those weird places I just went. But when you talk about calcium, you need it. Like I said, the calcium's in alfalfa. You've got the buffers, and you've also got that needed calcium for your muscle to function like it should. So I'm trying to find the downside to it here. Maybe there is one, but I can't find the downside to alfalfa, because, like I said, we've kind of debunked, like, it's not going to make your horse hot, not high in sugars. I know a lot of people worry about enteroliths. They're like, oh, alfalfa, it is high in calcium. That's going to cause enteroliths. We've kind of debunked that one too. That's not the case.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to a lot of these like nutritional conditions, like even laminitis, a lot of it comes from management and making sure that you're meeting that horse's nutritional demands and not going over the top with it too, depending on what that specific product is. Because that's where, like, I mean, laminitis, it's inflammation, damage of the laminae. So those little finger-like tissues that run through the hoof. And so you've got your horses that have the insulin resistance and metabolic disorders that are more susceptible to it, but it's also sudden dietary changes and excess of sugars and starches, or those fructans, so we've kind of debunked that, I mean, alfalfa is low in sugar. So that's where, when we talk about metabolic horses, it does have its role there. Another grass that comes to mind is teff grass. That's really become popular. One thing, I think it's a cool season grass. It's really hard to produce. And so that's where you start to get a little bit of becomes limited in availability coast to coast and trying to find it. And so like right now we have it in a tough grass pellet and always looking for ways that we'll continue to expand. So when we think of horses that are metabolic or even senior that need low sugar, low starch, but they don't want to feed alfalfa, even though you and I like know that we love alfalfa. So that's another fit for them as the tough grass.
Well, and one of the other cool things is, we talk about not just the type of hays we're feeding, whether that's the Timothys, the orchards, the alfalfas, the tefts, but also the way the form they're consumed in. When I lived out west, I used to run a lot of pack horses up through the mountains, and we hauled hay cubes like it was our job, because it was a great way to feed horses. Now in this
Well,
stage,
hang on a second. It's a great way to feed horses, and odds are you probably needed a certified product because of
yeah,
where you were going, right? And
certified
so when you're packing in bales is not very easy.
is not. We tried that one time, and you can carry a lot more hay in the form of a cube than you can in the form of a bale. Like if you got a pack horse, if you put the amount of hay on him that he can carry, you basically fed that might be a day's worth of hay for us. Like it wasn't.
Exactly.
Where a cube made that very, very possible, and it's also the certified weed free. And now in my career, where I see it is we get older horses that can't chew like they used to, and these products have been like the hay cube has been a huge game changer for them. So I'd love to kind of talk about what y'all's recommendation are when we're talking about hay cubes, not just when to use them, but also the best way to feed them.
So, I mean, we've got essentially, I'm gonna put it into 4 core buckets of forage formats. You've got your bales, whether that's compressed or traditional. That's your long stem. When everybody thinks of hay, that's what they're thinking of. Then you have
Mm-hmm.
chopped. So that's where we've taken that long stem hay and we've tried to cut it into pretty uniform sized pieces. They usually average 2 to 4 inches. So you're
Mm-hmm.
taking away half the battle right there for a senior horse and making it easier to chew and digest. Then we've got 2 other options. We've got the cubes and the pellets. Where these two differ, because when you think of bagged hay, these kind of have 2 different foundations that they're built upon. Cubes are made from a chopped hay, so you have your regular bales, your chopped, and your cubes are all going to contribute to the diet as a regular source of long stem fiber.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas pellets are made from a ground fiber, so very easy to digest, and like easy to chew, but they're going to move through that horse's system probably a little bit faster. They'll still contribute to that fiber mat,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not going to really build it up. They're going to slowly move on to the next process of digestion. But they're a fantastic source of fiber. They're easy to soak. Same goes for cubes. And that soakability is what makes the difference for senior horses with really poor teeth. So
Mm-hmm.
just because they're older doesn't mean that their biological need for fiber changes. We just have to adapt with how we're feeding them. And so that's where kind of then you start to look at you got 3 different options between the regular chopped hay, the cubes, and then the pellets as to like what degree of help does that horse need.
No, and that's one of the things that kind of diving into this conversation, we talk about fiber, but the next part is roughage. I think people try to blend the two, and roughage
Mm-hmm.
is that inch and a half of forage length, and then you've got fiber, which is the structure of the carbohydrate within the plant.
Yeah.
And like one of the places we use a lot of the cubes and the chopped hays are horses they can still chew, but they can't handle the bigger pieces. But also we deal with stomach impactions, and
Mm-hmm.
some of these horses where their stomach doesn't contract as well as it used to. They can't handle the longer stems, and the chopped forages and the cubes have been a great thing for those horses because it's almost, it's already down to a very manageable size. We can move that GI tract. Some of them, like you said, when we start getting into severe dental disease, the pellet, that's what we've got. And as horses are living older and older, living longer and longer, dental care, run out of tooth can often be a big limiting factor in their quality of life. But having these products available can extend that. So,
yeah, and I think when it comes to forage products and what format you're feeding your horse really kind of comes down to their preference and your preference because you've got a lot of different options there. And then you're looking at convenience. I feel like because that's what we've done in the horse industry, especially when we talked about horses are built to continuously graze. Well, we're running out of land, so they can't just all be on pasture that's going to meet their needs. So we've got to supplement them. And then a lot of times, like we have our horses in a boarding facility, and so that's where being able to treat these bagged forage products like a feed, where we may not necessarily be the ones that are feeding our horses on a daily basis because we're boarding them somewhere, but we're able to take this hay product and still be able to utilize it like a regular feed as far as the way that we can, whether it's scooped or um, getting put into a pan if it's chopped, and make it easy for those that we depend on for help caring for our horses to be able to help us. We'll all work towards the same goal of supporting the horse to the best of its ability, um, and make it in a way that it's easy to keep in the barn, it's easy to travel with, and it's easy to locate.
mhm. Well, and that's a good question too. When you talk about locating, a lot of times it's easier to find like the hay cubes over actual hay, especially when we're talking about alfalfa. And so, I guess one of my questions to you is, if you're thinking about using the cube, how do we compare that as far as, if we need 9 pounds of hay, what do we need to like? What does that translate to in cubes? Like, how does someone figure out how much cube to feed in place of hay?
It goes back to that pound is a pound the world around concept of if your horse needs 9 pounds of hay, you can do it in a long stem, like you can do it in 9 pounds of flakes, or you can do it in 9 pounds of cubes. The format doesn't change the weight. That's the big thing behind feeding by weight, not volume, because we know that volume's going to vary between all of these different products. It's going to take you're going to fit more um, pellets or number of pellets into a scoop than you are cubes. And so you want to be able to go back and say like, okay, I did 5 pounds here and I did 4 pounds of this kind of forage over here. So I know that I'm at 9 pounds. So it really doesn't matter what format it is. As long as you're feeding by weight, not volume, you're golden.
Yeah, when you rehydrate an alfalfa cube, a lot of people don't realize when you start rehydrating those alfalfa cubes or really any hay cube, you don't realize how much it grows. I mean, it's an amazing quantity that you get um, from those cubes,
Yeah,
and I
one
think
thing that and sorry not to cut you off there, but while we're on it, one thing that I want to hit home on is that because we talked about like we just soaked those cubes and like the volume that it expanded to. You want to weigh your cubes dry and then add water. You're not feeding by weight based on that soaked product. You're feeding by weight soaked on the dry product because that's where you can control the nutritional content of it.
it's funny. That's exactly where I was going. So glad you went there because I was like, when you see this, you want to weigh them dry before adding water. And
That's one of the most common questions we get. So that's why I was like, I want to make sure we hit home on that part.
I think it's important too when people are soaking these cubes, no matter the kind, you want to soak enough for that feeding. Like we don't when these sit around for, because a lot of people say, well, he ate it really good at first and then he didn't want to eat it. And it's like, well, did if you soak those in the morning, he's not wanting to eat it at 5 o'clock that night. That's not the cube.
Well, that
It's
and
not.
it sits there and it ferments, the bacteria grows, and especially if you're down in the southeast and it's humid.
Well, that's one of the things I remind people. If you want to understand bacterial growth and fermentation, look at how fast bread rises. If you ever make bread, it does not take long. Like, this isn't hours and hours for yeast to rise. This is fairly quick. And those yeast are everywhere in the environment, and this can go from a good product to fermented in the course of a day. So we say the same thing: get down to the barn, start soaking your cubes. They'll be ready to feed by the time you get done with the rest of the barn chores.
Yep.
Don't have it just sitting around. In Georgia, when we bale hay, there's no green to it. And when I got out west, I remember that was my first time unstacking alfalfa. One, those bales weigh a lot more than our Bermuda does down here. But two, I remember breaking it open and it was bright green. And I'll be honest, I almost had like a little bit of a panic attack on green hay. Because in the South, you start baling green hay, you're headed for fire. That's what's going to
Yeah,
happen.
your
And so,
moisture level.
oh yeah, and I remember looking like we'd just unstacked like 900 bales, and I remember we were busting some open and it was green, and I had this panic attack, and the guy's like, "What?" I said, "We're gonna have a fire in a few days. Like, this moisture content, like, we can't. This isn't gonna work." He's like, and he kind of looked at me like I was crazy, and that's when I learned, like, oh no, it can good hay can be green. So
Good hay can be green, and we've got a saying at Standlee: "Make America green again,"
that's it.
because high quality forage, it's nutritionally sound and it's beautiful, and so
Mhm.
that's what we're aiming towards, is that bright green color. And that's, we used to, because of where you're at, you said you're not used to seeing green hay like that. I think we've gotten away from it, but there used to be a big myth of like colors and additives going into the hay to keep it that green color. I know that's one thing we've never done.
Mhm.
And so like being able to maintain that color and nutritional integrity really just comes from the management of the raw product.
Well, that's really great because I love that. Keep America, make America green again. Yeah, yeah, that should definitely be your tagline. So
No, we'll have to see about that one. I know, our tagline is really like, it's grown for the life we love is what it's been. We're getting ready to kind of shift gears a little bit with the release of a really cool project I've been working on. But grown for the life we love is kind of a saying that we have, because we're growing this product because we love the production side of things, but ultimately it's supporting a life that you love. Whether you're out there trail riding and packing in the mountains, if you're going down the road showing, or if you just have a friend that's in the backyard.
mm. Well, Miss Sarah, that I think that kind of sums it up right there. I think that says it all. Growing a product for the life we love, and that's one thing about the horse world. I mean, I always say you don't wander into this life. You don't dabble in it. I mean, you're in or you're not. I always say, like,
You really are. Like, much to my husband's dismay, like I am the little horse girl that never grew out of it. I started riding when I was, gosh, 3 or 4. My dad actually went. I grew up down by Houston. My dad was a school teacher, and my mom was in medical device sales and didn't have a agricultural background.
mm-hmm,
And so my dad actually enlisted in the Army Reserves and went off to basic training. And I was such a daddy's girl that my mom needed something to do with me. Saw an ad in the newspaper for a free introductory riding lesson. Well, that free lesson is, yeah, we've gone down the rabbit hole. Here we are. Gosh, I'm 30 years later. And
gateway
so,
drug.
yeah, really the gateway drug. Hey, at least we're like, if you got high schoolers and they're out in the
Mm-hmm.
barn, or if you're going to rodeos and horse shows on the weekends, you know what your kids are doing. You don't have to stress about that. You know who they're with. Um, and it
You
can be
know,
a full family affair. And like, it's such a cool industry. And even within it, like all the different avenues. Like I've got my father-in-law breeds racing quarter horses, and I'm actually getting ready to go to the racetrack this weekend. So there's so many different cool aspects of it, and you never stop learning. And I think that's the key to ownership in the horse industry is not being afraid to learn and learn from different people and different mindsets, because everybody approaches something differently.
Well, that was the root behind this whole podcast, is we want to get out there and just educate. Like I always joke at the end of it, I always tell people, it's like, if you want to, like and subscribe. If you don't, just listen. I don't care. I just learn something. That's all we really want. Just learn something. And and that's the great thing about the equine world, is because people are looking for that knowledge. Because like I said, you can own a dog, you may have a cat, but if you have a horse, you in. Like there's no dabbling. This is your life. This is your life. This is what you do. Even those in the industry, I mean, I hang out with equine vets all the time, and we'll be away from work, and you think like, oh, good, they're away from work. They probably won't have anything to do with the horse. If there's a horse show or a rodeo or a track somewhere, you're going to probably see us there. Why? Because we haven't been around a horse in 48 hours, so we're just gravitated that way. So
yeah, we're having a little bit of withdrawals. Like
that's it.
I will forever be the person that if I'm out walking and I see a horse, I'm going to that horse and I'm going to pet it.
Yeah, that's how they always joke, is I'll spot the horse from a mile away, and they're looking at the horse. They're like, "You do this all day?" I was like, "I know. It's second nature."
Well, and it's part of what makes you good at your job, or like have passion around what you do. Because you get excited about it, you're interested in it, it hits you on a personal level, it hits you on a professional level. And it's when you have that kind of passion around it, it's easy to do something like what you're doing on starting this podcast, because you want to educate people. You just want them to listen because you want to learn something, you want them to learn something. And that's passion is what really kind of has driven me with Standlee in the years that I've been here. And it's why I'm so excited about a lot of the things that we have in the works that are coming out in the very, very near future, from a company and marketing perspective, I should say. But, it's one of those things that also drives us to be a partner with those that are feeding our product. We don't want them to just go in and buy hay pellets and then wonder, what am I supposed to do with this? Am I supposed to feed the same amount as I would baled? Am I supposed to soak these? So that's why we put a lot of time and effort into educational resources. We have a really great blog called the Standlee Barn Bulletin. We have a podcast that's called Beyond the Barn. And then we've got tools on the website. We've got a feed calculator. We've got the forage finder. We have a lot of great nutritional papers. And I'm getting ready to actually release some website updates here in the next month that are going to make those educational resources even easier to access and utilize. We truly want to be a resource for horse owners and for vets too. That's part of what it's been so great sitting here talking to you and diving in and forage, because most vets don't get very much nutritional training when you go through vet school. And so that's really a really neat part about you, is that understanding like how important this is for the horse. And so taking the initiative to go through and be able to train yourself. And like you said, just share the word with other people.
Well, I'll tell you, Miss Sarah, we really appreciate you being on today. And to our listeners out there, like, check out Standlee's podcast. I've been listening to a few episodes. Y'all got some really great stuff out there when it comes to forage. I've got a great nutritionist on your team. I've spent some time with her. So I tell our listeners, like, go check out their podcast, go listen, go check out the company. Great things y'all are doing. And Miss Sarah, like I said, really appreciate you being on today. I want to thank all our listeners out there. Like I said, keep listening to all our customers. Like, thanks, because I don't want to get a real job. So I really appreciate it. Thanks, April, for recording all this. Casey, thanks for editing. And like I said, hope everybody has a great week. And again, thanks for being on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. If any of your listeners want to be able to find those resources we just talked about, Standlee.com.
Yes, ma'am. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.